Hello, I'm David Hunt, CEO and founder of Hyperion Executive Search and your host for the Leaders in Cleantech podcast. Good to have you back with us. Delighted to have a guest with me today who's an entrepreneur of both apples and electrons, although we're going to be focusing mainly on electrons and energy transition. But firstly, Dave Watson, thanks very much for joining us.
David. Thanks very much for having me.
It's good to speak at last. So, I always think of Ohme, your company, more of an energy transition company rather than a mobility transition company, which is a bit strange because what you do is produce EV charging infrastructure, and we want to dive much more into that. But perhaps again, maybe you can just explain briefly your entrepreneurial journey, because you're a little bit of a renewables OG like myself, been around in this sector for quite some time before founding Ohme. So perhaps you could just give us a little bit of the flavour from your background up to the present point.
Okay, thank you, David. Well, I started off, did a PhD in chemistry in Cambridge, and from there, like most people in Cambridge, ended up working in the city. So I got involved in finance for a number of years, and then in about 2008-9, I reconnected with my supervisor from Cambridge, so David King, who had become the chief scientific advisor to the UK government.
Yeah.
And he was involved in the Climate Change Act of 2008. So he persuaded me climate change was real and energy security was a big thing. So I then decided to change complete direction and set up a company called Temporis Capital, which was an investment manager focused on the sustainability and the impact space.
Right.
And so what that effectively did was we developed, built, owned, and managed renewable energy projects, wind, solar, hydrogen, waste to energy, pretty much everything for our investors, which were sovereign wealth funds, pension funds, and that was all over the world, but predominantly focused in the UK and Ireland.
Okay.
And while I was doing that, I became I guess fascinated with energy imbalance and volatility of energy prices, and started to look at batteries as a way of balancing the grid. And these were the large static batteries. I don't know, some of the early days people would have seen these huge batteries in South Australia where, Elon Musk had built a huge one to balance the grid. They're now pretty commonplace around Europe, but at that stage it was just starting. And as I kind of, I guess, started to look at the usefulness of batteries, I could see that the cost curve of batteries were dropping at a more slow rate. And I guess we had seen, maybe talk about it later, but seeing the speed at which the price of solar panels had dropped.
Yeah.
And so kind of, I guess, putting two and two together, I thought, well, what would really, really cheap batteries mean? And I thought, well, God, if they're much more efficient, electric vehicles are much more efficient drivetrain than internal combustion engine. If batteries were super cheap, then EVs would be the mass form of transport much quicker than people thought. The cars would be parked in people's homes and driveways for 90-odd% of that, and driveways are at work for 95% or 90-odd% of the time. So we could use that latent battery to effectively balance the grid or charge at cheap times. And so that was, I guess, the idea of Ohme, and that was at around 2019, 2018, it was around that time.
Okay.
So it decided to incubate the idea for Ohme, which is a smart charging platform in Temporis. I think the first thing we came up with, or the first piece of hardware we came up with was a smart cable, because we figured that you could, if you could control and manage the charging via cable, then it didn't matter whether the battery management system in the car was fit for purpose, or even the home charger was fit for purpose. We had this cable. So that was the first iteration. Kind of made a prototype with that. Realized that people wanted home chargers, so started to develop our own home charger later on. And kind of, when lockdown came and prices of energy went negative, we were able to integrate with Octopus's agile tariff, and so paid to charge. And pretty much, since then we have continued to grow the business.
Yeah, and it's going exceptionally well, I know, and I guess I'd just like to jump back a bit before we dive a bit more into your own personal experience, because there's a bit of a leap there. You've touched on, as many of us did, that sort of started in solar and renewables, understanding and seeing the capabilities of those things, and seeing, as you've touched on briefly, the massive cost reductions, and therefore opening up more opportunities. But you're at that inflection point where you saw actually batteries now can unlock the flexibility and unlock more renewables. But many people have, and I'm glad that they did, and many of our clients, jumped on that development of battery storage assets and facilities. You saw beyond that to look at the batteries within cars, and we're still not obviously fully at a time of V2G or even V2H at this time. We're getting there pretty close, obviously, but that took a bit of a leap to see that was going to be a technological and I guess a legislative opportunity beyond just looking at the battery as a standalone stationary big container full of batteries that you touched on.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think at that stage, the difficulty was, well, for me, when I started to look at the static batteries, there wasn't really any long-term offtakes. The cost of the hardware was getting cheaper. So building a fixed price asset with no offtake, with the cost of the asset decreasing, didn't seem like a great investment strategy at the time. So it was quite a difficult thing to invest in. There was a few market offtakes that one could ultimately take, but that didn't seem great. And I guess when you talk about the V2G and V2X, the simple, if I look at V1G or simple smart charging, the amount of the amount of grid services that you can provide even as a side product of EVs is quite significant. Turning off a charge from that, if your car is charging and you stop charging, from the grid operator's perspective, that's the same as pumping more energy into the grid. Mm-hmm. So ultimately, with simple smart charging, you can provide a large number of grid services. The other thing you can do, I guess I began to realize, is actually when you start to look at the shape of the energy curve, there was large pieces where prices were really negative, and at that stage, energy tariffs were quite flat. So the ones that were provided to customers were quite flat. So I thought, well, why wouldn't you create a tariff where you could get customers to buy at really, really cheap times when there was too much wind on the grid and things like that? And while most energy suppliers at the time didn't think people were interested in complicated tariffs, I felt that if you had the technology that made it easier for you to shift the load, then customers would, because you've heard, most people will drive 10, 15, 20 miles to save a few p in the price of energy for petrol or diesel in their cars. So why wouldn't they change a preference in an app to move their load around or move to an energy supplier that provided such tariffs? I think one of the things that made that I guess that move easier was that around the same time that we had built our prototype, Octopus were beginning to create some time-use tariffs. They were beginning to create tariffs like Agile, which was very, very forward-looking for energy suppliers. So it was the combination of that technology plus what we had in the box allowed us to, I guess, demonstrate what which was at that stage was our future theory of what the market would look like. It's demonstrated that in the real world, and but the benefit of hindsight and looking back 3 or 4 years later, it now seems quite obvious. But at the time, we were basically, I guess, thinking about things that a lot of people didn't think were possible, or even people were interested in.
I think that's a key point, really. And again, it's, there are a lot, and we've worked with a lot, and I know a lot of companies who've created great EV charging products, and they saw, the massive uptake and the sort of electric vehicles, and looked at it very much from a enablement of the EV rollout by providing sufficient charging to encourage that to happen. And clearly we're seeing, and I think you posted just this morning, just how much of that is happening in the UK at least and elsewhere. But actually taking a leap beyond that to get to this point of this time of use tariffs, which you say weren't really a thing when you first embarked, or were just becoming a thing. So I think a lot of success of entrepreneurs, and maybe get your thoughts on this, comes sometimes from both the convergence of things in and outside of your control, but also timing is everything, right? Because if you would have created the Ohme product 5 or 6 years ago, and OVO and Octopus weren't providing these tariffs, then you'd be in a much different position.
I agree 100%. I think, look, I had the advantage of starting off in the energy space, unlike some of the other guys who were focused from the transport space. So they, as you said, they focused on the enablement, whereas I'd started because of the Temporis work from the energy side. So I could see the problems that were coming down the line from more and more problems and opportunities of more and more distributed energy.
Yeah.
And so I guess that situational thing was useful, was something that at least had my mind thinking about what problem I needed to solve.
Yeah.
The timing part is absolutely spot on. I mean, it was just around the same time that Octopus were coming into the market. I think when I met Greg first, they had somewhere between 70 and 80,000 customers, which is pretty unimaginable given where they are now. So they were the first in a wave of innovative companies, but the first and the most progressive in the world at that stage. So, both Greg and I had a view that energy would have a different price and place and time, which wasn't a widely held view. So to have somebody like that here in the UK was phenomenally lucky. And so we built and designed our software system all around that paradigm where energy would have a different price and place and time, and we would get series of instructions from whether it was energy suppliers or network operators to move the load around. And I think without those ingredients, it wouldn't have been possible to build a company like Ohme or even it would have been just an idea that we couldn't bring to fruition. And I think the problem often with companies, and you probably see it, if you start at the wrong time, and even though you become successful, for one thing, it's quite difficult to pivot to a new thing. So if you become successful at just distributing or solving some of those front end problems, it's quite difficult to pivot and then become a software player where create smart grid products. Whereas I think from our perspective, that was the sole purpose of Ohme was actually to use that value that was embedded in the batteries of the car or part to help to unlock value for the drivers, and then using that smartness to unlock all the value that existed in the UK grid, which to that point had been effectively done. So by making the cars smart, having smart suppliers, and having these connected devices everywhere, you're implicitly making the whole UK grid smart, which effectively unlocks a huge amount of value that doesn't exist in the dump system. So you're right, timing was everything, as it always is for entrepreneurs.
Yeah, but you've got to be smart enough to take advantage of that and see it coming, I think, but and be aware when the timing does happen. But like you say, we both sort of conclude you do need a little bit of luck and to be in the right time at the right place. But let's talk a little bit more about the products. From an outside, you look and say, oh, that's a nice, well put together home charging unit. But again, that, as I say, is almost like, for me at least, that's the byproduct or almost the sideline for what you're actually looking, or what I see that you're doing and achieving. But perhaps you can share a little bit of where you are as a business now, what exactly are the range of offerings and solutions that you have. And I guess just give a quick flavor of that, and then we can dive more into this flexibility and transition piece, which I think is a really critical part of what you do and what we need to do.
Yeah, well, I think, I think it might be constructive to talk a little bit about, I guess, our evolution of how we got here. And why and how the hardware fits in with the software. Yeah. Ultimately, when we started, we believed the hardware was a delivery mechanism for flexibility, and we could ultimately control and manage other people's hardware, or control and manage the car, or even deliver our own hardware. So we started off with a software company. Yeah. Ultimately, one needs quite a high quality piece of hardware to deliver flexibility at scale on a reliable basis, because one, you need to be connected to it. You need to be able to control the connectivity, and some of the cars and vehicles didn't respond as well to some of the smart charging instructions. So you had to build a whole lot of software and additional things, additional edge to manage additional edge cases where the cars didn't respond in the way they should. And it's all right when you have one car manufacturer, maybe a Tesla, that was built and designed for continuous connectivity services, but a whole lot of other cars, the connectivity of being continuously connected is a side product, yet you're trying to build a smart charging platform on top of that and give everybody an equal service irrespective of what the car does. So that that was relatively difficult. So we focused. So we had to develop our own hardware that was both reliable and well connected as a delivery mechanism. And when we started quite early, we had early adopters who were really, really enthusiastic about what we did, because we were the first company to help them move load around, to help them get access to Agile, Go, anytime any of these earlier tariffs, the first versions of those tariffs. But they were initially they were the majority of the cohort, but as we started to evolve about 2 years ago, they became a smaller cohort. And actually, what we realized is we had to make charging easy, the installation of a charger and the charging easy and reliable for the masses. So we had to take a step back and try and understand what that actually meant. And if you think about the UK, it has a large number of fleet buyers and fleet managers, and they're not, a lot of those fleet managers are not the likes, or the ones that one would think of like a BT or National Grid fleet. They're actually big retail fleets. So I'll give you an example. One of the fleet companies that we manage, the installation as well as the life experiences for Motability, and Motability is the largest lease company in the UK and probably one of the biggest ones in the world, and they manage and lease vehicles on behalf of disabled people in the UK. So to get the idea of their scale, they have about 750,000 cars in their fleet, and buy 250 or at least 250,000 new vehicles every year. So 10 to 15% of all new car sales are Motability. Now, Motability, being a lease company, is not used to, in the old ICE world, they provided one lot of services. In the new EV world, when the whole charging piece, so the whole charging piece is an integral part of owning an EV. And when charging isn't reliable, or when the installation of the charger isn't reliable and hard, that becomes a problem for all of their drivers. Yeah. So in order to as I said, to fulfill our promise of making charging easier and reliable and cheaper, we had to build what we call a managed install service for Motability and their customers, which would involve us taking customers through the whole installation process and then holding their hands through the in-life experience, bringing them first, creating a first successful charge, then moving them, or at least explain to them how they move towards cheaper and more reliable energy tariffs. So that was a piece of technology that we built to help scale Ohme up. And then actually there were a number of other fleet companies that looked exactly and had the same problems as Motability. Yeah. And we started to provide that solution to Motability. The next step was dealing with the car companies or the OEMs, because I guess when we started first, they would just recommend a charger or any charger with the car because they thought that was something nice to do. But actually, as the number of EVs they sold increased, they began to realize that the whole charging experience, or that EV experience, was linked with the ownership. So again, you had the same thing where they wanted to make sure that the charger they were recommending had all the features. Well, one, you could manage the install, and they also had to have access to the cheaper energy tariffs. Yeah. So we built another piece of technology that allowed us to work with those car companies, and we've signed up the Volkswagen Group here in the UK and in Ireland. We've Mercedes, which has recently announced Polestar, and the aim for us is to ultimately make that installation piece and the whole charging piece cheaper, reliable for the average customer as opposed to that. So that was, that was a big move away from just focusing on moving load around. It was thinking of a more holistic experience to see how we could use technology to make that whole experience ultimately better and reliable. Then on the energy side, with the Ukraine crisis and other things that developed, it was the price of energy increased and the volatility of underlying energy. So the simple smart tariffs that the energy suppliers had created, such as Go and Agile, were replaced by even more sophisticated tariffs, and Intelligent Octopus, Overdrive, are examples of that. And what those tariffs are a result of more real-time communication between us at Ohme and the energy suppliers. they want to buy energy at the cheapest times. They want to manage and hedge what they call their imbalance, which is, at every half an hour they have to buy and sell the same amount of energy.
Yeah.
So what we do with the churches is help them to do that by, as I said, giving them more real-time communication, having those integrations. And so by doing that, then, even though energy prices had increased over the last 12 months, we were able to ensure that our drivers that were on those types of tariffs were able to still have access to the cheaper energy. So there was more innovation on the grid side. And then the next step is flexibility, which is beyond the purchase of energy and managing a balance. It's how do we respond to the network operators, both the system operator, National Grid, ASO, and the DNOs, and then help them to manage constraints or even help them balance the grid. So there's a number of, there's the winter flex coming up again later on this year, which allows drivers to effectively participate in some of the peak events for Christmas. So that's a new technology we're developing. And then we have Crowd Flex with National Grid and Octopus and OVO, where we're actually bringing large number of drivers into flexibility services and running a series of trials to see how cohorts of different personas of driver respond to the same sort of stimulus, so they can design, I guess, a system in the future that can work better with EV. So that's, I guess, an evolution of where we are as a company, and the technology we've had to build and continue to evolve as the market conditions have changed, and we've moved from early adopters to early majority.
Yeah, that's an interesting point of inflection. We'll touch in a moment in terms of what's next, but just elaborate on that point. What I think so beautifully is, on one hand, you've got a public, what you say, which is moving from early adopter to moving towards mass market. But even within that, I think I'd like to get your thoughts on how we engage further, because we're the team at Hyperion, we all drive EVs, and most of us are on Octopus or OVO or something. So we kind of have a bit of banter in the office, who got the cheapest charge overnight, and all this kind of stuff. But if you go outside of the bubbles of people that exist in our world, into the sort of the general public, very few people have an understanding of anything other than you plug in your car. And obviously there's a lot of myths and bullshit out there, but just generally people think they plug in the car, they get charged, and they go. They don't realize that they can I guess participate in some of these tariffs. And it's great that Octopus and OVO are getting better at promoting and obviously engaging more customers. But what do you think are some of the key things that we need to do to really help, before we talk about the sort of behind the meter side, in front of the meter side, just with the general public and the consumers and the fleets? What can we do more, or what are you seeing that's helping them to engage through technology such as your own, but actually getting them to understand they can participate in a just much cleaner, smoother, faster, easier world through engaging in electric vehicles or with the mobility transition? Well,
I mean, I think that's a great question, David, and I think it's exactly where the industry is now the biggest challenge we all have. When we started, when I said we worked with early adopters, they were so, we used to people on Twitter and post about the cheapest energy that they had consumed and really into it. And I thought that everybody within my ecosystem or my network knew about cheaper energy, so I thought everybody did. But as I said, with Motability and Volkswagen, and move beyond the early adopters or even the energy engaged, we began to see large cohorts of people that were not engaged with energy and actually charging their EVs in ways they shouldn't.
Yeah.
And then even on the side of that when dealing with the OEMs, a load of the people who were selling EVs and the people who were buying them were not engaged and didn't realize that you could save so much money. I mean, we know that you can charge for about, a typical EV for about a couple £100 a year. And then on an SVT tariff, that's more like 1,000. So even on a day-night tariff, it's probably more like 500-600. So irrespective of where you get from, there's anywhere from 800 to 400-500 savings a year. Yeah. And a large majority of people don't understand that. So what have we been doing with that? We've started or began to start programs of moving our drivers along, I would say, an education curve. You say, well, we'll get a successful plug-in, a successful control plug-in, and then move them along and start to to educate them of the alternatives of what they can do to get cheaper charging. And that's when they become an Ohme driver. We've also doing some work at the point of sale, which involves working with our big lease counterparts as well as the OEMs to create materials to, one, educate them and give them all the information that they need, so they, as an industry or group or even companies, understand the world, what's possible, what's available for them, and to be able to talk intelligently about energy.
Yeah.
And then use them as a conduit to educate drivers at that point of sale, as to what's available for those drivers that are, I guess, lucky enough to have off-street parking. And I mean, there's a number of, people will talk about, the people who don't have any off-street parking at all. They're not as lucky, or they won't have the same sorts of opportunities. But as a first cohort, if we could really work on the lowest lying fruit about educating all of those people who have EVs and are thinking about EVs as to the costs or the cost of energy is available, and I think that's a big challenge. And we're working hard across a number of different ways on that education piece, because I think that will really drive adoption. And as Greg said in one of your earlier podcasts, every unit of electricity that's consumed, that's shifted, even though the person who shifts is cheaper, it's actually cheaper for everybody.
Yeah.
You make the system cost of energy decreases with every kilowatt hour of energy that's moved from peak to not peak. Yeah. And the whole cornerstone of all these smart tariffs is moving load around from peak or expensive periods to not periods. So
exactly, and that's the whole beauty of it, is that we solve a system related problem by being self-interested to a large degree in terms of what am I actually paying for my personal charging or my fleet charging from that perspective. What I'm really pleased about you is obviously the tie-up with Mercedes, with Polestar and others from an OEM point of view, because I still hear so often horror stories from dealers who are selling cars and chucking in a smarter charger. Obviously, we can't do entirely dumb chargers these days, but just not educating. And just the other day, I heard a story about someone who's complaining they were paying. Basically, they're on some kind of tariff and they were paying full whack for the charging at stupid times of day, and was therefore complaining that what they'd heard about cheap charging wasn't true. So going back to the point, working with the OEMs and working with the dealers to better educate the experience for drivers is a critical factor, I think, to the transition on that side. So I'm glad that you're doing that. Let's touch on the other side of things, because we were talking about flexibility and obviously having a renewables background like my own, the knowledge that we just need and can afford so much more renewable capacity on the grids as long as we can store and flex and balance and all of these things. So how do you see what we're doing in the UK with these time of use tariffs and flexibility that's evolved, when you see that there's lots of parts of the world in Europe and in the US where we're quite far ahead in that regard? Are you seeing and optimistic that we can start to be good practice or show good practice and then roll out into other countries? I mean, what are your thoughts on international expansion for Ohme and for these types of solutions?
Well, I think I can go back to your earlier point, David, when you said about timing is everything. I would say for Ohme, location was everything as well as time. I mean, the UK was the best place in the world to start a company like Ohme. I mean, one, it's a big enough market, and that's big enough by the number of people, but also big enough in terms of the EV penetration was one of the highest in the world. It wasn't the highest, but it was one of the highest for a large market. Yeah. It had quite a large number of renewables, so the energy prices were ultimately volatile. It had a couple of forward-looking energy suppliers that were happy to make the first smart tariffs, and it had a forward-looking grid operator and regulator that started to create all these ingredients to start. So the UK is ahead of the rest of the world in terms of smart technology, starting with smart energy suppliers, smart flexibility suppliers, and even smart charging suppliers. So I think UK is ahead, and we've had the environment, or we've had all the pieces that we need to build a business of scale. It's all right moving a couple of thousand chargers around and doing that, but actually one has to do it at scale across a whole host of card types and conditions to build a platform that makes sense. And so now the time, and having built and incubated and perfected our technology in a few other, I guess, and as I said, a few other UK companies, now's the time where we begin to export that knowledge and export that to different countries. So from an Ohme point of view, we've the first two countries that we pushed ahead on were Ireland and Belgium. I mean, the Irish one's quite obvious, and Belgium we had a unique competitive advantage in Belgium a couple of years. So we started those about 18 months ago, and they're doing really well. And now we're launching into France, Spain, Italy, and Germany and Scandinavia, and the other side of the world, Australia, and it's pretty much exporting UK technology. What's really interesting is the shift in mindset amongst energy suppliers and grid operators across Europe, and so there's a desire, and certainly a desire to want to learn from the UK and want to use and try to to learn from them and to accelerate their own position, because historically they had very centralized systems where they could turn on and up power to manage load, but in this current world, the whole of Europe is effectively interconnected via a series of grid lines and interconnectors, and distributed energy is being installed at a never increasing rate. So that volatility in energy prices and that need to manage their own personal imbalance and supply demand is there. So they need these customer centric solutions that can help them to move load around to match supply. And so it is a huge opportunity for us and for other UK companies to expand internationally.
Yeah. Just jump back on the briefly looking at your journey as an entrepreneur, because we touched on there sometimes things outside of your control. Timing clearly is not always in your control, and location clearly you to an extent is within your control, but to an extent you are where you are. So, but beyond that, there are ways in which you have grown phenomenally fast and are at the forefront of this flexibility evolution through EV charging in a really short period of time. So are there any sort of, I guess, thoughts or suggestions for other entrepreneurs who are looking to go on the journey, perhaps to expand in the way that you have, certainly to internationalize in the way that you plan, in terms of the mindset around innovation or the mindset around growth that really, from a personal perspective, has helped you and your team unlock the opportunities and the good luck that's befallen you to some degree?
There's effectively three things I would say. The first one is solving, the first, when Ohme started up, we created technology that solved problems that didn't exist, or we were building technology to solve problems that didn't exist. So while the early adopters embraced that and built technology, embraced our technology, when we went to the mainstream and tried to tell them about using Ohme for some uncertain benefits that they may get in the future, that was very difficult. Very difficult. So actually our key breakthrough was trying to understand what problems they had today, creating the technology to solve their problems, which became a gateway to allow us to use the Flex. And, so that customer service piece and making sure that we could give their customers a reliable install as well as in-life connected experience. And focus on that, the reliable, cheap and easy charging became our way to scale. And then once we'd solved that problem, they went, and how about the flexibility, and how about the cheaper energy and all those other things? So that was a big lesson to me. And so what is the customer problem you're solving today? The second one is you can't predict the future. So while one has an outline as to where the market will go, actually how the market responds and how your customers respond for your product is unpredictable. So you have to take feedback quite regularly and iterate quickly and get, I would say, MVPs out that allow you to learn from your customers rather than trying to design the perfect product.
Right. Yeah.
In the lab. And the last piece is ultimately you need to optimize for capital. Everybody that, when you're an entrepreneur, there's reasons to spend money everywhere, and capital is a scarce commodity. So you have to be very, very mindful how you spend and where you spend capital, because a pound today isn't the same as a pound in the future. And so, a simple mindset will be, I'll save money, I'll optimize for margin by making this investment today. But actually, that might turn out to be a path that's not worth pursuing. So you've wasted the pound. Whereas in 2 years' time, or 8 months, when it turns out to be the right thing to do, it might cost twice as much, but there's 100% probability that you need to spend it. So upfront, it's spend as little capital as possible on the things you're doing until you realize they're actually successful, and then effectively spend more capital at that stage.
Right. Super. No, I appreciate those. Those are great insights. I think the first to allude to one of the podcasts we did recently with Yuri Levine, who's a founder of two unicorns, actually. But and his subsequent book was Falling in Love with the Problem, Not the Solution. And you alluded to that, solving the problem that exists and really looking after customers and getting that feedback and iterate all the time.
Doesn't that come from the pain pleasure thing? People will act quicker to reduce pain that they will to do things that will give them benefits in the future. So I think I didn't know and realize that, but through setting up Ohme and some of the other companies, I've realized removing pain is a much better way of finding customers at scale.
Exactly. Solve the pain problem. Cool. Well, listen, there's a lot we could go on for hours, and we don't have too much time left. I'd like to get some thoughts from you, David, about I guess what's next in the next few years, partly for Ohme, but more broadly for the energy and mobility transitions. What would you like to see, and what do you see coming if we were to have this conversation again in 3 years' time? What does that sort of next 3 years in your crystal ball look like?
Well, I think there's two big macro trends that are going to profoundly change the energy system over the next couple of years, and that's the decreasing price of solar energy. So that's ultimately going to drive the prices of energy in the middle of the day to low or negative prices pretty much all over Europe. So we've seen the price of solar panels and solar cells drop nearly 50% in the last 12 months due to oversupply. And you don't need to have solar in your house to feel the benefits or see the benefits of that. That will ultimately drive negative pricing events in the grid, which most people who have smart technology, whether they can trap and capture solar, will see that. So, and that's going to be distributed. It'll be on every. We're going to see solar globally is up about 60% this year, and it's likely to triple the next 2 to 3 years. So there'll be more solar installed this year than all the time up until 2019 or 2020. So we're at a tipping point, and nearly half of it's on rooftops. So the nature and form of solar, so that's one big macro trend that's going to drive an abundance of electricity in a period of time. Now the second macro trend is the cost of storage is also continuing to drop. And that the biggest form of storage is effectively EVs. And as that drops, that's going to drive the price of EVs lower, which will cause its own pain because of residual values and a whole host of other things, but that cost of storage is dropping. So those two things, solar and battery, which exist hand in glove, because one is made for cycling, the other one is made for or generates pretty much every day. And they're both distributed, will drive immense change in the system. And we'll see more change over the next 2 years than we've seen in the previous 20. That'd be my prediction. And so I think that's the system, because these larger and larger projects are getting harder and harder to build, these larger batteries and solar and wind, because they require big grid upgrades, which can take a long period of time. And they will come, but they'll come slow. They'll come in a relatively linear fashion, whereas the proliferation of distributed storage and solar will just effectively continue to grow uncontrolled. So that will ultimately lead. It will empower the end consumer and end customer, because they will have those assets at their control and disposal, and they will be the ones that will get a benefit from that. How we get there will be a complicated process, because there'll be a lot of stakeholders will have you'll have a battle between people who have a vested interest in the future versus the ones who have a vested interest in the past. And that change will be very quick.
Yeah.
And because of the speed of it, it'll cause a lot of pain and a lot of noise in both directions. So it's going to be it'll be a rather messy, complicated next couple of years, or next 3 or 4 years, but we really are at the tipping point. So that's, I guess, how I see energy and transport. For me, the two they're coming together. They were two separate industries, so the whole piece is there will ultimately be one big industry.
It's that convergence,
with different players providing different roles into that. What is Ohme's role, and how do we see it for Ohme's? Ohme's role is one where we obsess about our customers, individual ones and big corporates, and then try to make and help facilitate great customer outcomes from there, starting with the mobility side, and allowing them and their customers have access to the cheapest and most reliable outcomes. I mean, that's ultimately what we've done. As we've grown, we've had to build more and more solutions here in the UK to work for more and more customers and to bring more and more customers on board, because there isn't one customer. There's such a broad dispersion of needs, and that's made our business quite complicated in terms of the software we've had to build to support what looks like relatively simple, smart grid. But we've done it in the UK, so the next piece for us is ultimately then to push and drive that same approach into Europe. So we're expanding laterally to drive what we're doing in the UK, and then internationally, and then in the UK side, pushing more and more towards more and more customer engagement and more engagement with flexibility. True technology for them, for our customers, the aim is to make it as easy as it ever was, irrespective of whether they're super technical or not. So that we will have a new app coming out later on the year, which is designed to be suitable for all types of customers. Whereas I would say, if I'm being honest, our first app was designed by engineers or scientists for scientists or engineers. And while it can achieve most of the things we wanted to achieve, the user experience isn't anywhere where we want to do. But that's kind of, I guess, the difficulty of building a product to solve a problem that hasn't even happened yet. So it's quite difficult. You don't have that ability to test and learn in the way you want with a normal customer. So that's, I guess, our plan. I don't know if that answers your question, David, but that's kind of, I see the system evolving and how I see, I guess, Ohme.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Love, and fully agree, by the way, but as you probably appreciate, in terms of that drive towards that convergence of mobility and energy transitions being just one and the same, or two sides of the same coin to a large degree. I think the last point, just on touch with what you were saying there, is around, technology works best when you don't know you're using it. And I think that's the point we need to get to, where customers, relatively oblivious. They just, the technology happens without them having to worry about it or think about it or do anything about it. It happens, and we're getting to that point. The disruption of the next 2 or 3 years, I'm really keen to talk to you about, but we haven't got another 3 hours to do, so maybe we'll do that over a beer or a coffee at some point. But for now, before we just close out, I did touch at the very start that you're also an Apple as well as an electron entrepreneur. So just in a sentence or two, you better explain that. So what else do you do to keep you busy when you're not building Ohme?
Well, I mean, I've always been really passionate with trees and growing stuff. So everything that came out, planted oak trees everywhere. We planted from seed and then planted them everywhere. So when I was fortunate enough to be able to, I guess, buy a decent piece of land in the early, about 2010 or so, I planted with my dad a big cider orchard, because I think we did look at it. It was a nice south-facing slope in Southern Ireland. We did look at grapes, but there wasn't, at that stage, there wasn't much record of actually successfully growing grapes in a wet climate like that. So we planted a whole lot of apple trees across and on our land. And because I was, I guess, reasonably obsessed with it, I just collected varieties from all over the world, from the West Country, from France, from Spain, from Austria, and planted it. I guess one of the largest collections of cider apples, and certainly in Ireland, but as big as, I guess, any in the UK. And once we planted them, we had to start make some cider with it. So we started experimenting. Given, I guess, my chemistry background, I got involved in it with my cousin, who had also a chemical engineering background, and we started making cider and made other interesting drinks with apple. So we made an apple ice wine. So freeze concentrate apple juice and let it ferment slowly. So you get, I guess, like a dessert wine, 11% alcohol, and it's quite sweet. So we made it from apple, and we made an apple port, which is an apple distillate from our cider that we distilled and then we aged in whiskey barrels, and then and some cider apple juice, and then that would age in our cellars. Yeah, we won a number of awards from it. The the Bath show a few years ago, we got the best international cider, and we were awarded the best drink by the Irish Food Writers Guild a couple of years ago for our ice wine, which now sits in quite a number of Michelin star restaurants as an aperitif. But the thing that I like most about it is the pressing and the picking and stuff, which I do with my family and my kids and the cousins and everybody around. We just pull them in and get them to work. And from this time of the year, we spend most of our Saturdays pressing apples and I guess drinking what we made the previous year. We'll have the kids, but
cool. Sounds good. We'll maybe have that disruption conversation over a cider at some point then. But thanks for sharing your story. Thanks for sharing what you're doing. Thanks for the work that you obviously do as an organization. We'll point people through the episode page to Ohme so they can find out more about you and about the organization and the company and the work that you're doing. Obviously, good work to and we'll continue to see you as you expand into Europe and beyond. But for now, David, thanks for sharing your thoughts and time. It's been great to talk to you.
Okay, thank you, David.